Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Goettl, and with me today, as always, is Todd Shell. And welcome to the November Patch Tuesday. We've got some interesting things to talk about today. I was expecting it before we even got started. I expected at least one person was going to ask about the curl.exe update. Yes, absolutely. We're going to talk about that. So I'm actually on the road today. So I'm actually, in my everywhere workplace today, working out of Chicago. So as we get into some of the screen sharing, you're going to see I may have to juggle things a little bit more. So I apologize in advance, but we should be able to work through that. It's funny, Todd, working off of two monitors at home all the time is really a luxury.
I know you get spoiled, don't you?
Right. And now that I've got to try to do all of this from a hotel room, I'm trying to figure out how to. So I had to disable my email pop-ups, my Teams notifications, like all the different things to make sure that none of that comes up while we're presenting and I'm screen sharing. So we'll see if I did it well. All right. On that note, we're going to walk through a high level of the updates that came out. We're going to talk about some recent news that you'll definitely want to be aware of. Todd is going to walk us through some known issues, the bulletins that were released, and some things to look out for there. And then we're going to wrap up with what we call the Between the Patch Tuesdays. So that is everything that's released since last month, between last October Patch Tuesday and now. So on that note, we have the overview of what released yesterday. Adobe Acrobat and Reader is kind of the main one that we're going to talk about, although Adobe did release 14 different product updates. The majority of those are the cloud apps and other things as well, but what InCopy and Animate and a bunch of the other applications that are less likely to be targeted. So the way that Adobe kind of focuses on those is they have priority breakdowns of things. A lot of those products, because they're less likely to be targeted, even if they've got a critical vulnerability in them, Adobe puts it as a priority 3. Out of this lineup, we're still suggesting that you treat the Adobe Acrobat and Adobe Acrobat Reader updates as a higher than priority 3. There were actually 9 critical vulnerabilities resolved in the Acrobat and Acrobat Reader update. So there's enough, out of the total 17 vulnerabilities resolved in that one update, 9 critical. There's definitely something to focus on there. Chrome did release as well. For those of you who have been on since October, you've been hearing us talk about the fact that Chrome has shifted over to a regular once per week cadence at minimum, that they're going to be releasing Chrome updates to focus on security bug fixes. So they've recognized the fact that they've had a lot of months where they're releasing practically back to back. Many of you have experienced this when Chrome does their regular update and then follows up with a 0-day the very next day, or they did the 0-day and the regular update was supposed to be coming out only a day or two later anyway, and they end up with back-to-back releases in a very close amount of time. So they're trying to get more predictable for everyone so that everybody can kind of keep up with it more frequently. So they're tending to do weekly security updates for the Chrome browser, and then they shift over to a longer cadence out for the feature updates. So Chrome, as always, is releasing there. And then you notice that our Microsoft bulletin count is actually down a little bit from previous months. That's because of the Server 2012 end of life. We're not going to be talking about as much of those things individually, but there definitely are updates available for Server 2012. The ESU support, this is the first month for it, and there are some updates that definitely have vulnerabilities applying to them. So we'll talk about all of that and more, but starting off, let's talk about a little bit of news. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the On24 platform that we're presenting out of, you've got a couple of different windows that you're able to take a look at. One of them is a tray with some downloads and content that you can get there. The presentation that you're seeing right now is available in that sys So for those of you who need to download that because you need slides from this to go into your change control conversations and other things, grab that PDF download from there before you jump off of today's call. You will get a link to the presentation after the fact as well, but this gets it to you sooner than everything will be published on the site later. We got to wait for the recording and everything else to be done, and then that gets published a little bit later in the afternoon. So grab that there. You'll see some other material that if you're interested in, go ahead and grab some other things there. Some great quarterly kind of research and survey kind of stuff that we've got there that oftentimes helps people with having tough conversations of what needs to be focused on. We're in kind of strategic planning mode right now for next year, so you may find some things of interest in there. You're also going to see that I'm about to share my screen. When I do that, you're going to see a new window pop up that is the screen share. Focus on that screen for the next little while here. If you're off of one monitor, you may want to resize things to make that shared screen the one that you're going to see more for the next few minutes. So with that, let's see if I get this right. Yes. Now you should be seeing my shared screen here with all the different articles we're going to be covering. So again, I'll spend more time here than on the slides for the next little while. But the first topic that I wanted to touch on was a recent DDoS attack against OpenAI. This one has definitely caused some pain for those dabbling with or using products that are relying on the ChatGPT platform. The large language model there is definitely being consumed by a lot of different technologies. More importantly, this is talking about kind of the overall effect of some of that. There's some additional research, going into has this introduced anything threatening as part of that disruption? So it's kind of an interesting read to talk about what happened, how we should be concerned about things going forward. But that's just one of the good articles talking about it. In this case, I think the other thing that is interesting is the motive behind this one. The group responsible for this attack is Anonymous Sudan. They're hacktivists and basically claiming that the ChatGPT DDoS attack was their responsibility. And the reason that they did so was because ChatGPT is supporting many Israeli tech companies. So they're targeting this from a geopolitical standpoint. So that was kind of the reasoning behind this. But it's a good read if you haven't caught up on that right now. The second article today is around some of the edge devices that are being targeted. So this article from Dark Reading is talking more about several 0 days that have been being targeted in edge devices, and China is kind of behind a number of these attacks, some of the different funded groups out of China. So this is more of from an internal perspective, giving people the information they need to understand to make sure that you're updating firewalls, VPNs, hypervisors, load balancers. F5 has a vulnerability that was being targeted. SysAid, I think it came up in this one, but I've read too many articles this morning, and now the specific firewall brand name is escaping me. I think I've got that in the next article. But there's a number of different technologies that are being targeted. It's definitely a trend that we're going to continue to see more of. It's also an area that many organizations, these types of devices fall behind from an update perspective. So this is more from an internal perspective. If you know that this is a constant challenge, getting teams motivated to update these technologies. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's got a potential to cause outages. Yes, the cost of upgrading those is costly. But take a look at some of the research from like this Recorded Future, research article. If you want to link to that, there's definitely a targeted trend against these types of devices. They're on your perimeter. They're exposing your environment to attack. and there's very sophisticated threat actors who are utilizing it. So just kind of some ammo there to try to drive that conversation if you need more help in supporting that. Another specific attack that's been going on recently from the threat actors that brought you the Move It attack, we also now have this sysaid solution being targeted by the LACE. Let's see, what was their name? There's a specific subgroup that was called out in there. And this is probably the article that didn't talk about the subgroup, but basically the same group that did the Move It attack, they're now targeting the sysaid Tomcat platform. The vulnerability is listed here. If you know that you're running that platform, there's definitely some work to be done there. The sysaid Tomcat web service could have several unusual files in there. That's kind of how you can spot that this might be going on. And the other challenge with this one is these guys are cleaning up after themselves very effectively. So it kind of talks through what they're doing. They go in, they run some scripts, they laid out a bunch of files and kind of execute the first stage of the attack. That gives them the ability to laterally move elsewhere. And then they're going to run a PowerShell script to try to clean up as much as possible at this entry point to kind of make sure to cover their tracks. There's very shortly, there will be one of the researchers who discovered this is saying that they've got a fully weaponized proof of concept of how to do this exploit, and they're going to be releasing that at some point in the near future. So once that becomes available, even more threat actors will be able to take advantage of that, other than just the one group right now that's been confirmed to be using this. So this has all been kind of going on since October 30th, and definitely something you want to take a look at if you're running the sysaid Tomcat server. There's a vulnerability you need to be aware of there. So Microsoft and VMware had a couple of conflicting issues over the last couple of months. Todd, this is one of the issues that you've been talking about in the known issues for since August, right?
Yeah, there seems to be this like love-hate relationship between Server 2022 and VMware ESXi hosts. For those of you that have been on, and I've been talking about known reported issues from the Microsoft side on Server 2022, they've had that secure boot issue that they reported from way back. I'd have to go back and look exactly when it started. I think all the way back to February. But anyway, it turns out that VMware actually did release a patch for ESXi that corrected that pretty quickly, even though Microsoft was still reporting it. What was kind of interesting is that Microsoft finally dropped that from the bulletin this month as a known issue. And then I saw this article that's talking about some of the other issues that are popping up still with ESXi. So wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. And this is a really good article that kind of walks through a couple of different issues that are there still in existence. And Microsoft is providing some workarounds for those. So.
All right. Thanks, Todd.
You bet.
So that's kind of the overall news across several different areas there. I'm going to, apparently it's not going to let me switch back over to, oh, there we go. Advance my slide real quick. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is the pair of vulnerabilities that came out mid-October relating to curl.exe. So there's two CVEs. 2023-38039 is the HTTP headers eat all memory issue. And then we've got 2023-38545 SOX 5 heap buffer overflow. So both of these vulnerabilities are resolved with the inclusion of curl.exe version 8.4.0 in the November Windows Updates release. So if you go down to the versions here, you could see that pretty much all versions of Windows were affected there, all currently supported versions. This one did not go back to 2012 that I saw. Double check and make sure the other one didn't as well. So it might just be all the newer platforms that we're really worried about here. Yeah. So with the OS update, the curl.exe version is being updated to the supported version that resolves these two vulnerabilities. So your OS update is how you're going to fix this month. But wanted to make sure to cover this to make sure that everybody got those details. Now, Microsoft provided the mitigation information that you see here. There was kind of an extensive write-up on the vulnerability, how you look into it, and even the steps you can take to basically create a new policy that would deny vulnerable versions of curl from running on a system. They basically said you can't just remove curl from the environment because it could have a drastic impact on the Windows Update services from running. So you can't just remove it, but they were able to deny it the ability to run. So not sure what was going on behind the scenes there, but if you did put these mitigations in place, there is a workaround here now to go and remove the Windows Defender application control policy from denying the curl exe from running. They don't call this out specifically, but my interpretation from looking at the mitigation, you're basically saying, hey, deny run for anything between 0.0.0.0 and 8.4.0.0. So under that kind of understanding, you'd think, hey, basically deny anything that could be vulnerable there. Now, the version that was updated in this release was version 8.4.0 of curl.exe. So if we go back and look at the deny rule here, 8.4.0.0 is at the upper end of that deny rule. The way I interpret that, most likely you need to remove this or that may block the new curl version from running as well. May or may not, they don't call it out specifically, but probably best to go and clean up that policy and make sure that that doesn't prevent the new version from running as well. So that is the curl update. So those two vulnerabilities are both resolved by this month's OS update. All right, switching over to the next slide in line. We're just going to start to get into the other known exploited and publicly disclosed vulnerabilities for this month, starting with the Windows DWM core library elevation of privilege vulnerability. So this vulnerability is rated as important, has a CVSS score of 7.8, but it is definitely confirmed to be exploited. Also, there is a public disclosure about this. So proof of concept code has been released publicly. So it's not just one threat actor with the information about this, like publicly available. Anybody can get proof of concept code to see how to take advantage of this one. So definitely kind of puts more pressure on getting this resolved. If exploited, the attacker could gain system level privileges if they exploit this vulnerability. So basically they would own that box. In this case, it's affecting all of the Windows 10 and Server 2019 and later editions. So definitely something that all of your currently supported Windows devices are going to need this update. It's part of the same update that's going to fix the curl vulnerability as well. So again, one update, we're taking care of most of our risk right off the bat there. The next two are both actively being exploited. The first of those is the Windows Smart Screen Security Feature Bypass. Important, 8.8 CVSS score, again, actively being exploited. So you can ignore the important there and treat this as a critical, basically, because there is confirmed exploits in the wild for this. The code maturity here is functional, obviously. There is active exploits being targeted against this, so they've definitely confirmed that there is functional code against this one. In this case, the attacker would be able to bypass the Windows Defender smart screen checks and their associated prompts. All they have to do is convince the user to go to a specially crafted URL or even click on a shortcut file to compromise that user. So user targeted makes it even easier for them to execute this, because all they have to do is socially engineer their way into letting that user do the work for them. And with that, they can bypass security measures there and potentially run additional dangerous things. So this would be kind of the first step in a chain vulnerability attack, where they would basically do this to bypass security features, exploit another vulnerability to do something else, maybe get the right privilege level, and then execute another vulnerability to actually execute some malware or do whatever else they're trying to do. And at that point, get onto the box. So this is definitely a gateway vulnerability to doing other bigger, nastier things on your devices. The second one that has another confirmed exploit here, Windows Cloud Files mini filter driver, another elevation of privilege vulnerability. Important, 7.8 CVSS score. If we look at that, again, the attacker in this case, if they exploit this vulnerability, would gain system privileges. And in this case, this one, actually this and the other one both affect Server 2012. So for those of you who do have Server 2012 running yet, you have ESU support in place, you should be able to patch your 2012 servers against these two actively being exploited vulnerabilities. All right. Last two KBs that we'll talk about here real quick. These two have been publicly disclosed. So nobody is actively targeting these in the wild at this point in time, but enough information has been disclosed about these to expose them to additional risk. The first one here is an ASP.NET denial of service vulnerability, rated as important, 8.2 CVSS score. In this case, the attacker could run this attack over the network. The vulnerability could be exploited if HTTP requests to .NET 8 RC1 running on IIS in-process hosting model are canceled. Thread counts would increase, and the out-of-memory exception is impossible, or is possible in that case. So there's a little bit of complexity to it, but again, enough information has been publicly made available on this, where an attacker has kind of a jump start on doing this. Now, the value to the attacker is this DDoS attack would allow them to cause a total loss of availability of the service. Definitely, if they're able to figure this out, it would be able to take down a site that's running this vulnerable version. If you are running .NET 8, Visual Studio, the 2022 versions below here, or ASP.NET Core 8.0, those are the versions that are affected by this. The last one that we'll talk about real quick here is on the Office side. So this is another security feature bypass. Important, 6.5 CVSS score. Again, because it's been publicly disclosed, it makes it a little bit more dangerous here, because threat actors have a jump start on being able to research how to take advantage of this. The attacker would have to convince a user to open a malicious file. I think we all agree that's not hard to do. Users are able to be convinced to do all sorts of things, including buying gift cards for their CEOs and sending them to them via SMS, right? So it's not hard to convince users to do foolish things like open files that are untrustworthy. If they take advantage of this, and this is the part where if I were an attacker, this is the part that would interest me most. Not only can I target a user, so basically it's a statistical challenge at that point. Give me 10 users and I've almost got a guaranteed chance I'm going to get one of them to click on it. But this also allows me to bypass the Office protected view and open in edit mode rather than protected mode. So I bypass, that pesky, enable editing, that we all have to click through whenever we open a file that comes from a source outside of our own networks. This bypasses that. So definitely somewhere that threat actors would be interested in, and with some public information available on this already, it gives them some ability to go and research and figure out how to do this. So your Office update this month, I would suggest putting it up there with the OS update and just making sure that it gets in place in a timely fashion. Versions affected there: Office 2016, the Office LTSC 2021 edition, Microsoft 365 apps, and Office 2019 editions. So pretty much all of your currently supported LTSC and Office versions and the 365 apps versions. So definitely suggest getting that rolled out in a timely fashion to make sure that if threat actors do find a way to exploit that one, that you're safe from it. Just because it caught some recent news, I wanted to just mention this one anecdotally. If you caught an article earlier this month, I think it was November 3rd, the team over at the Zero Day Initiative at Trend Micro had identified a number of vulnerabilities in Exchange Server. They disclosed those to Microsoft, and timing-wise, it did not work out to do that release in October. So Microsoft missed that window for release, so they were going to basically release those updates for November. Well, based on ZDI's very strict rules of time frame from when they disclose to a vendor to when they're going to disclose publicly, a bunch of news started coming out on November 3rd that Microsoft was not releasing these, and ZDI was basically beating up on them along with Bleeping Computer. All that aside, the vulnerabilities that were being talked about there look like they're all covered in the Exchange update that just came out. There were 5 vulnerabilities that were resolved in the Exchange update. Several of them were spoofing vulnerabilities that matched the descriptions that were given to Bleeping Computer from ZDI, kind of talking about the different vulnerabilities that they were talking about. 2 of those spoofing vulnerabilities were directly attributed to the same researcher from the ZDI team who discovered those. A couple of others were attributed to IBM X-Force and another independent researcher that found a couple of the other ones. But long story short, if that was something that, if you're running Exchange, saw those articles and are concerned about that, it looks like everything that ZDI was making noise about should be covered in the Exchange update. Nothing's actively being exploited. I know in the article from Bleeping Computer, it said 0 day, but in the terms of 0 days, there's a 0 day vulnerability, which is something known before a patch is available. And there's a 0 day exploit, meaning something is actively taking advantage of that before a patch is available. So the 3 exploited vulnerabilities we talked about earlier, those would be a 0 day exploit. There's several research groups that use the term 0 day a little bit more loosely. They need to get more specific and say, is it just a 0 day vulnerability or is it a 0 day exploit if they're going to use it in those terms? But it oftentimes confuses people. I just wanted to make sure anybody who was concerned about that got the details of no, not actively exploited. Yes, should all be covered. Just make sure to get your Exchange update tested and rolled out in a timely fashion, and you should be good to go. All right, switching back over to slides now. Should be done with all of the screen sharing, so I'm going to advance through. We talked about all of those slides. Okay, a couple of notable Linux vulnerabilities. First one, CVE 2023-45853. This is a CVSS 9.8. It's a critical vulnerability in Minizip, a component of zlib that leads to an integer overflow. So it's definitely one to keep an eye on as it rolls out. Now, we've talked about this a couple of times over the last few months here. In the Linux world, a vulnerability can be identified and then it can trickle out over a longer period of time. Sometimes it could be several months before it actually gets down to updates that you can actually apply across your environment. But this is definitely one to keep an eye out for as it starts coming out for different platforms that you may be running. You'll want to make sure to get this one resolved across those. It's not an officially supported part of zlib, but it's present in many distributions along with zlib. So that's why they're kind of calling this out. If you want more details on tracking that, you can go over to TuxCare. I believe last month I showed the TuxCare CVE page that you can go to kind of research those, but that will give you some good mapping to track what distributions it's vulnerable on and which distributions there's updates available for already. Next one here. This one has been exploited in the wild since August. This is the HTTP 2 protocol vulnerability that basically allows the rapid reset attack technique to be executed. So just kind of some continued visibility around this. There's additional versions across Java that have been updated since last month when we talked. So again, just make sure to go and double check that any Linux versions you're running with updates available to resolve this vulnerability, that you're continuing to get those cleaned up. All right, we did have some servicing stack updates this month. Server 2008, 2008 R2, 2012, 2012 R2, Windows 10, and Windows 10 Server 2016 edition. So all of those had a November servicing stack update. So begin taking a look at those. Again, with servicing stack updates, it's one of those where you want to make sure to stay ahead of that and make sure that you don't let the servicing stack updates fall behind too far. There are breakpoints where you may not be able to do updates past a certain point in time if you don't keep up with those servicing stack updates. All right. Lifecycle awareness, and then actually I'll talk a little bit. I know we've got some questions about Server 2012 ESUs that have been floating around in there, so we'll address those two right after I'm done with this one. We have the recent release of 23H2, so your Windows 11 and Windows Server Edition as well, or Home Pro, Enterprise, and Education Editions all had the 23H2 release just at the end of this last month. So those are now available. Go ahead and start testing those and make sure that you're ready to go and you know that you can start moving systems forward before end of lives of other editions start coming around. The only upcoming end of life that we're going to have is 2019. You can see the release date and then the upcoming end of support date, January 2024. So that will be your last publicly supported server update for 2019. So just make sure you're ready for that and starting to move forward to 2022 edition. Or if you're on the 2016 long-term service branch, obviously you can continue to run on there. All right, so Todd, let's go through and make sure that we've got any ESU questions answered there. Michael asked the question of what are options for getting Server 22 ESU support. Basically, you have to subscribe to Microsoft's ESU support. We've talked about this a little bit back and forth. Microsoft did have two different license models available previously, what they referred to as an MAK license key, and then they had the Azure Arc subscription option, which is a monthly subscription fee. Right before Patch Tuesday last month, they basically stopped providing the MAK model and started basically telling people that the only way to subscribe to Server 2012 was this Azure Arc subscription model. So that I've heard mixed kind of feedback on whether or not an MAK option is still available. Less and less it is being forced off of that option and just over to the Azure Arc option. So if the rep you're talking to and your conversation started with Microsoft early enough that you were talking about that MAK model, you may still be able to get it. If not, you're probably only able to get it through that Azure Arc subscription. Okay, so that's how you
subscribe.
A couple of comments
on that real quick.
Go ahead, Todd.
Just to interrupt you there. So obviously we went through this process internal here at Ivanti as well. And, our content team that does the production side, we ended up going the Azure Arc route. And it was actually pretty painless. Even though it says Azure in the title, this is for on-premise as well. Microsoft basically gave us a short PowerShell script. You run it on an endpoint. It reaches out to your Azure instance, and it ties the endpoint, installs an agent, and ties the endpoint to a central management console in Azure. And basically, you see all your endpoints, and you can license them monthly. So it was pretty painless as far as that goes, in case you're wondering about that. Just kind of a quick update there. We haven't gone the Mac key route, but we have heard from some of our customers that they're continuing to get Mac keys especially if they have disconnected networks or isolated networks and they need to go that route. So they are still available, but like Chris is saying, Microsoft is really pushing the Azure Arc route. And it is somewhat of an advantage if you know that you're not going to run for a full year, for example. The Azure Arc model allows you to do a month-by-month subscription rate. So something to keep in mind.
Yep. Now, that Azure Arc subscription, basically, you can do that whether you're running on-prem or in the cloud. So it's just a licensing model. Once you subscribe, you install the Azure Arc agent and you link that server to a ESU license. So once you've done that, now it's ready to receive ESU updates. After that, you get to pick your vehicle for how you want to deliver ESU updates to that device. If you're using WSUS, if you're using Microsoft Config Manager, Azure to deliver your updates, or if you're using an Ivanti product to deliver your updates, if all of those are able to deliver those updates. For the Ivanti side, those of you who are subscribed to our ESU content, basically we just have a subscription fee to continue the generation of that content, the testing for it, the infrastructure to kind of support that. So our additional fee there is an operational cost for us to continue providing that so you can continue to use our products across your entire environment. So that's more of just an operational cost. You still have to subscribe to the Microsoft ESU, but that additional content subscription from us gives you the ability to then push that content through our products. So if you need more details about that, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, Chris, I took a quick look at the ESU updates this month. They did address 17 vulnerabilities. So obviously continuing to manage the updates and add those security fixes as well. So if you do have Server 2012, at this point, you're starting to run unsecured if you don't get the ESU updates. So keep that in mind.
And two of those were actively being exploited. Two of them were the zero-day exploits that we talked about earlier. So, good call out there. Difference between end of support and end of life. So this is always one of those gray areas. So end of support means like if you try to call, you won't get any support whatsoever. End of life means that the product is completely going away. So typically in vendor terms, end of support means, hey, we're not supporting this product anymore. You're not going to get any updates. If you call us, we're not going to help you, fix any issues or anything like that. It's no longer supported. But if you choose to keep running it, the software will continue to work. Go ahead. And then there's end of life where they're literally saying, hey, there's no way to run this anymore. In a lot of those cases, the product will most likely not function anymore. So it may vary a little bit on some of those definitions. In terms of Microsoft, there's regular support, and then like end of support, like you see on this lifecycle page, means that's the end of when Microsoft is supporting that particular branch. Then they may go into an extended support, what we're talking about with Server 2012 for ESUs. End of support date means public support is done. If you want to continue getting support for something, they may choose to offer an extended support option. So end of support versus end of life, a lot of times there's a crossover or a overlap in definitions there. Many vendors kind of overlap those in different ways. But in Microsoft terms here, this is end of public support. Microsoft may or may not provide an extended support option for that. All right. Okay, Todd, I think we are ready to get into the bulletins. Go ahead.
Okay, let's jump into it real quick. Chris already mentioned that there were several Adobe releases. We're going to focus in on Acrobat and Reader, which is kind of one of the most common we use across all of our operating systems, obviously. 17 vulnerabilities, as Chris mentioned, 9 of which are rated critical. So keep this in mind. They generally release in conjunction with Patch Tuesdays, and this is no different than usual. Usually we get their quarterly update in December, but this one's a little bit early this quarter. We did see an update for Chrome as well that came out late yesterday for their usual Chrome desktop. This is a smaller one with just 2 vulnerabilities addressed. I did talk in there about 4 security fixes, but didn't mention what the other 2 didn't have associated CVEs yet at this point. So just be aware that the stable channel was updated to 119 for both Mac, Linux, and Windows. So there was an update yesterday. Moving into Windows 11, as Chris mentioned, 23H2 has now arrived on the scene. You'll notice that on the KB side, they still have 22H2 and 23H2 tied together under the same KB article. I think most of you are aware that there's actually an enablement patch that will allow you to easily switch from 22H2 to 23H2. So really nice there to expose those features this time. So it looks like they're going to go forward with a 2 KB model as far as the releases go. In looking at the KB itself, you don't see this too often, but there's a nice release notes video in there that talks about everything they've done as far as new features go and some of the security fixes that they've made in this as well. So if you pop open that KB, take a look at it. I think it's a little 5.5-minute video. Can walk you through that. They did fix 30 vulnerabilities this month. Chris has talked about the 2 known exploited there, 36025 and 36036, and then of course the other one, 36033, which is both publicly disclosed and known exploited. Interesting, there is a new vulnerability, a new known issue that popped up this month under Windows 11, and you'll see it shows up under some of the Windows 10 versions as well. This has to do with a mobile device management apps that are reporting incorrectly that they may require drive encryption. This is a reporting only error, as they note down below the 3rd bullet or 2nd bullet I have here. This is only a reporting issue. It's not an actual technical issue that's happening with encryption on the endpoint, so be aware of that as well. It does impact Microsoft Intune as getting this information, and it could impact third-party MDMs as well as seeing this error. So it's a 6500 error that says you may require device encryption. Be aware of this one if it pops up. Like I said, it's only a reporting error, and hopefully they'll have this one cleaned up pretty quick. It also does show up on the new 22H2, 23H2 release as well. Some other funny ones here that showed up. This has to do, the first one has to do with the introduction of Copilot in Windows. They said that in a 2-monitor situation, your users may notice desktop icons moving unexpectedly between monitors and other icon alignment issues. So that's kind of an interesting one. So be aware of that. And also they have a little bit of a color issue with the way their emojis are being displayed. Kind of interesting. They called this one out as well. It sounds like these are pretty low-hanging fruit, and they should be able to fix these pretty quick. On the Windows 10 front, one other note here on Windows 11, I think I want to bring to your attention. And I didn't include it here, but under Server 2022, Microsoft this month introduced Server 2022 version 23H2, not to make things more complicated, right? It's a server core version that we hadn't seen recently, and they did introduce it this month. It's a headless version of Server 2022, so be aware of that. I saw it in the KB articles, and we're taking a look at it from a support standpoint right now, as a matter of fact. Don't think it's that much different than your usual 2022, but we'll give you maybe some updates next month on that. Anyway, Windows 10, 31 vulnerabilities, basically one more than we saw in Windows 11. Again, the same known publicly disclosed and known exploited issues. That encryption drive reporting error that I talked about does surface under the Windows 10 Enterprise 21H2 versions. I have them all listed here, as well as 22H2. And it also shows up under the Windows 10 long-term service channel for 2019 set of updates as well. So these 2 particular KBs under Windows 10 were the only ones that were reporting this. So kind of be aware of that if that does pop up in your environment. Chris was talking about Exchange Server and those other vulnerabilities that had been reported earlier in the month as being addressed. There were 4 vulnerabilities they called out in the KB article. The first 3 there, the 36, 035, 39, and 50, are the spoofing vulnerabilities that Chris was talking about. And the 36.439 is the remote code execution vulnerability that was addressed this month. But again, these are for Server 2016, CU23, and 2019 CU 12 and 13. So basically there's two KB articles for each one of these releases that address these particular vulnerabilities. As Chris said, make sure you get these covered even though they're rated important this month. We saw updates this month for SharePoint Server, only one vulnerability. It was a remote code execution vulnerability though, and it's across the common versions that they're supporting these days, 2016, 2019, and the SharePoint Server Subscription Edition. We did see 4 vulnerabilities addressed for the Office apps. These are the click-to-run versions here I have listed on this bulletin. Office Microsoft 365 apps, Office 2019, and the Office Long-Term Service Channel 2021. The one vulnerability Chris had talked about earlier, the 36413, is the publicly disclosed one that he was mentioning in our introduction. And there are 3 additional vulnerabilities that were addressed here as well. One is a security bypass. The other 3 are remote code execution type vulnerabilities. Very light update on the on-premise installation of Office. A vulnerability associated with Excel 2016, Office 2016, and the Office Long-Term Service Channel 2021 for Mac. Same 4 vulnerabilities, again, that were addressed in the click-to-run versions. But again, only updates for those particular releases this month, pretty light. We did see a .NET update across the board. The .NET framework all the way from 2.0 to 4.8.1. 2 vulnerabilities addressed. One had to do with a security feature bypass, and the other had to do with an elevation of privilege. Again, you don't necessarily have to restart when you do these updates, depending upon if the app was open or not. And of course, we do have a monthly roll-up as well as a security-only update. Again, the monthly roll-ups include a large number of updates going all the way back to 2016, whereas the security-only updates are just those 2 vulnerabilities this month. So if you're just using security-only updates, you have to do it every month to make sure you get, well, every month. I should say every release, because .NET doesn't necessarily release every month. So that includes all of the updates that we saw this month. Again, the Windows 10 and Windows 11 are rated critical, so definitely you want to make sure you move on those. All the others are rated important this month. I'm going to go through the Patch Tuesday, between the Patch Tuesdays very quickly. There's been a lot of activity this past month. This is information that we've gleaned from our catalog as we release updates. So as inclusive as possible that we can do on the release of third-party applications. The ones that have the third-party applications that report CVEs, we've lumped those together here. You can see there, I'll go through these in a little more detail in the next couple of slides where we can call out the CVE specifically. But you can see this month was the big Java update. So we see not only Java itself from Oracle, but all the associated applications that use the OpenJDK. We also have a number of security updates that come out every month that don't necessarily report CVEs. These vendors will call them out as security updates, even though they don't necessarily have associated CVEs or they don't report them. But we know there are some security issues in these, so we generally lump these together. And then we have our non-security updates as well, and those are shown down below here on the bottom. But you can see a large number of updates this month. Obviously, Oracle released their Java updates. What's interesting here is you don't see Oracle Java Development Kit 21. That is the new long-term service support version of Java. If you're not aware of that, it actually did come out last month. And so just this month, though, they released all the latest updates for Java 8, Java 11, and Java 17. Again, these are the long-term service versions, and you can see the number of vulnerabilities that were addressed in each one of these particular releases. Azul Zulu is another one that we cover. We cover both the FX version, which is updated for certain video functionality. They were released for each one of the operating systems, each one of the Java releases as well. So you can see there are updates for version 8 through version 21, and those same vulnerabilities are addressed here as well. Coretto, this is Amazon's installer of Java. Again, they released all their updates for version 8 through version 21 this month. So we have those covered in our catalog. We did see a bunch of Chrome updates. As Chris said earlier, they've been releasing on a fairly regular basis. So we did have a series of updates addressing anywhere from individual vulnerabilities if they were critical enough. And then there was a major update back on October 31st, which addressed 13 vulnerabilities. We did, of course, see Firefox updates. The last ones were on October 24th. As a matter of fact, I was talking with one of our customers this morning. They were saying, well, why didn't we see a Firefox update yesterday? Well, there isn't anything released just yet, so I would be on the lookout for a update of these applications, Firefox and Thunderbird, coming soon, since the last update that they have officially released on the security side, we're back on the later half of October there, 10/24. Did see some updates on VMware Tools and VMware Workstation as well. A couple of vulnerabilities addressed there, so if you're using these products, make sure you get those updated. We are, of course, tracking Apple updates with the release of Mac OS and third-party application support in our product set. We are keeping track of all of these now as well here. There were updates for Monterey, Ventura, and Sonoma last month on the operating system side, as well as a lot of the common browsers across the operating systems there. Again, we do have the security updates without CVEs that are listed here, as well as the non-security updates it's listed down below here. So a lot of applications getting updated on the Mac side. You can see here, Sonoma coming out as the new operating system, fixed 44 vulnerabilities. So very important that you get that update on Sonoma if you're running the latest version to get those vulnerabilities addressed very quickly. One thing we have seen that's kind of interesting is that Safari is becoming specialized for the different operating systems it runs on. So there was specifically a Safari 17.1 for Ventura and one for Monterey. We think it has to do with the way Apple is supporting their Apple Silicon M1 and M2 chips. But be aware that there are specific updates that are not just common across all operating systems, but they're unique for each one of the operating systems on the Safari side. As with the Windows side, we did see Chrome updates across all of the Apple releases as well, the Mac OS releases. We did see those same Firefox and Thunderbird releases as well. Similar number of vulnerabilities introduced for each one of those running on Mac OS. And of course, you know, they do run Edge, obviously. So there have been quite a few updates in the past month. You see they're coming out like about every 2 weeks as far as regular updates go on the Edge side. So if you're running Edge on Mac, make sure you keep up with those as well. And to wrap up our third-party apps, we have VLC Media Player, 2 updates. Interestingly enough, I noticed that there was a CVE, the same CVE in both of these. I suspect there was some kind of a technical problem that they had to reissue this particular one, but not sure on what's going on there. So with that, that wraps up the third party between the Patch Tuesdays, as well as what happened on the OS side, on the Mac side. So with that, Chris, how are we doing on the question side?
There were some additional questions about Lifecycle. So this is one of those things where Microsoft has a ridiculously complex lifecycle policy. There's what they're going to support if you call them, and they've got multiple models for it. There's fixed support, there's modern support, there's if you call and it's an issue with the OS only or an OS and another Microsoft product, they may or may not fix it after regular support dates. Then there's security updates. What Todd and I have been focused on is typically focused on security updates. So when I talked through the life cycle before, 2019 had an end date of January 2024. That's Microsoft's regular support end date. I have not seen anything specific, and maybe, I don't know, Todd, if you have either, but I don't know if they're going to be doing, they have a extended support out to 2029. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen them say anything definitive about will security updates be supported after the January 2024 date or not.
I haven't seen anything either.
So that one, we'll have to keep an eye out for, what that means there. Depending on what you're running, they have very specific kind of areas where they will still support something or where they won't support it from a product support kind of ability. So yeah, if we find any more specific details about security updates, which is what we tend to focus on when we talk about lifecycle, we'll try to bring that information up as we get closer to that end of regular support date for 2019. But yes, they do have an extended support date that goes out further, I think 2029 or something like that. I tried to go and dig through, but it's, again, I think I clicked through 3 different sublinks that went and talked about very different complex variations of circumstances where something would be supported or not. None of them touched on whether security updates would still be supported after January 2024. So don't know the answer to that offhand.
Okay. There were some questions on the ESU and when we will support the content for those. And the answer to that is we are going to drop the 2012 content on Wednesdays today. We decided to make the decision that, these are security updates. We realize that, but we want to make sure that we get all of our general releases out very quickly, as quick as possible. And so we'll provide all of our typical general security updates on Tuesday. Usually we're releasing content later in the evening, usually around between 8 and 10 o'clock at night Central Time, for those of you who are our customers there. And we didn't want to push that out any further because obviously we have people coming up in Europe that are starting to pick up and run with things early the next day. So we decided that we will do the ESUs on Wednesday. We'll release those as quickly as possible. This is exactly what we did with Windows 7 and Turf Server 2008 as well. So we want to follow kind of the precedent we've set there. And that's kind of our game plan on that. Keep in mind that our releases are based on when the material is available from Microsoft. A lot of times we might release Office the next day because a lot of times from Microsoft we see that the updates for Office are released very late in the day on Tuesday. And so by the time we process our content and get that out to the field, we end up doing that on Wednesday as well. So keep that in mind as to how it works from us releasing content for our patch products. Anything else on that, Chris, that you saw?
I think there was, and unfortunately, I can't take links out of the Q&A and use them elsewhere, but there is a link that, not on the regular Lifecycle pages, of course, but end of support announcement that was made for 2019, where they specifically are saying extended support includes security updates at no cost and paid non-security updates and support. So looks like it'll be kind of security only. And if you have any support issues, it may be something where you may have to pay for additional fixes or things like that. But 2019 is supposed to go out an additional 5 years. So 2029 will be the end date for that. Security updates is about the only thing that's firmly committed there. So
okay.
Thank you for that link to Aaron and a couple others who were able to find that information. Let's see, I think that's most of the questions that we had. There was one more question about the HTTP rapid reset vulnerabilities. So we did discuss those last month for more of the browser side of things. Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Chromium, like all the different browsers updated that one already. The only reason that came up again this month was some of the Linux platforms are continuing to trickle out that update. So as I mentioned, a lot of the Linux platforms, a vulnerability is discovered and it trickles out slowly through the open source ecosystems. So it's getting there. But for the Windows side of things and the browsers running on Windows, Linux and Mac actually, the HTTP vulnerability 2023-44487, that one should have already been resolved for the browsers especially. So
I think Microsoft did reissue the Chromium vulnerability, just an information update this month as well, Chris, to continue to draw attention to that, right? It was like I think it was like 4389 or something. I don't remember the exact number. But
yeah, there was an information only revision on there, but there wasn't anything new released for the Microsoft side for that vulnerability.
Correct.
Okay, I think... Yeah, so Douglas mentioned they're still patching server 2016. So 2016 is a long-term service branch. So yes, that is still being supported. But that one was specifically, Microsoft has been changing a lot of their support terminology over the past few years. 2016, I think, was the last long-term service branch specifically kind of named that way. 2019 was not designated as a long-term service branch, but the way that they're kind of supporting it kind of acts almost the same way anyway. I think the difference there is security updates only versus 2016 is more fully supported, getting configuration and other like bug fixes and stuff as well.
Yeah,
so there is a
getting
difference
monthly
between the 2016 updates versus the 2019 updates. Support for those two will be different. 2019, after it goes into extended support, will be security only, where 2016 is a long-term service branch. So they're doing more on the 2016 branch because of that long-term service designation. Like I said, Microsoft's lifecycle policies are nothing but complex. All right. I think we got through most questions there. Anything else that you see,
I don't see
Todd?
anything else, Chris. No.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone once again for joining us this month. We will look forward to seeing you all in December.
Sounds good. Can't believe it's the end of the year already.
Yeah, very, very close already. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
See y'all.
All right. Thank you, everyone. That is a wrap for this month. As always, you should definitely subscribe and make sure that you're getting the latest information from us. We're going to do not just the monthly updates, but we'll also be streaming other things like the top questions asked and other great tidbits of information that you're going to want all throughout. So definitely subscribe to our feed, and we'll see you here again next month.